The intention behind this presentation is to give a comprehensive overview of the events that transpired in January in regards to the Freedom Convoy. During this presentation, I will provide you with information on the origins of the convoy and how it was allowed to gain such notoriety and amass so many participants. Prior to that, however, I will also discuss what was going on behind the scenes. A known and self-proclaimed conspiracy theorist by the name of James Botter and his wife had created a document titled Memorandum of Understanding the Call to Action. This was a document that was basically a pseudo-legal preposition to the government in order to either have demands contained within the paper be met by the government or resignation of government officials. In this document, a few key demands were written down. Demands which included that federal and provincial levels of government to stop all restrictions and mandates surrounding the coronavirus. Fines were also brought up. No more fines should be given out to people related on COVID infractions. And finally, another requirement was the jobs that were lost due to the mandates, people refusing to get the vaccine or follow proper COVID protocol, and basically demanding the reinstatement of these people who lost their jobs. The main goal that Botter was intending by this document is to get Elections Canada to call another election and dispose of this government which he felt was tyrannical and mischievous in nature. However, perhaps through a lack of understanding of the process, he failed to realize that this organization could not constitutionally call a re-election in this sort of manner. Now, I won't dwell too much on the organizers of the convoy and their beliefs and opinions, as that is not really relevant to the topic at hand. What I will focus on more is the actual physical aspects of the convoy and the media's relationship with the organizers and the protesters, as well as government and police involvement. To do this, I'll review our first piece of news that came out in January 28th and was posted online to the CTV News website. The article was written by Michael Woods and Josh Pringle, veteran journalists. I do not have many gripes with this article. I feel that it is fairly unbiased and it delivers facts about the convoy without taking things out of context, without trying to portray the convoy in a certain type of light, which, as you will see, other news organizations failed on being objective and unbiased. A key piece of information here in this article, which is very relevant to our discussion, is the interaction between the convoy organizers and the Ottawa police chief at the time. During this interaction, the organizers of the convoy assured the police chief that no one who was associated with the convoy, i.e. protesters, would be violent in any sort of way, meaning that the protest was going to be 100% peaceful. However, the chief already knew that this was not going to be possible, as he expressed his fears that individuals and groups not directly associated with the convoy would use this opportunity as a center stage to come in and bring in their malintent and basically start violence under the guise of being protesters. Similar fears were expressed by him in regards to the online community actors on Twitter and on other media platforms would be inciting violence in regard to the protests while not actually attending it, which was another consideration that he took to mind. This is important to state because this is the convoy at its infancy. Later on, these bad actors would indeed show up. I'm sure you have seen the images and videos of Confederate flags, Nazi symbolism and imagery in forms of swastikas, SS insignia, and the likes. This was perpetrated by, let's say, bad apples of the group, and I am not denying that these instances were perpetrated because they were, and perhaps some of them were even associated with the convoy protesters. However, the media used this to their advantage to push a certain narrative, as the articles after this one do not share the same unbiased nature. Rather, they rely on sensationalism and focus on these bad actors and attribute their actions to that of the whole. Now, I would like to direct your attention to a piece of news that is very biased, in my opinion, and shows its underlying narrative quite clearly. This next piece is from Vox, and it is written by Zach Beauchamp, titled "The Canadian Trucker Convoy is an Unpopular Uprising." The gripes I have with this piece of news is, well, the title is quite polarizing, as well as the actual content is, well, you could say that it is not merely distasteful, but even untrue. This would be, this would constitute fake news, in my opinion. It's expected, since Vox is a very liberal-oriented news organization, thus it shall pertain and gear its coverage towards its base audience, which is, you guessed it, left-leaning people. Let me quote the first paragraph here. The so-called Freedom Convoy is nominally protesting a vaccine mandate for truckers implemented in mid-January on both sides of the US-Canada border, but the demonstrations have swiftly ballooned into a broader far-right movement, with some demonstrators waving Confederate and Nazi flags. End quote. There is a very big problem here. This piece of news is equating everyone at the convoy as being part of the far-right movement, which is entirely untrue. I will show you a few other images here in a bit of everyday Canadians. You've got elderly, you've got children, you've got truckers, all people from different walks of life that have no relation to far-right organizations or far-right notions. Let's backtrack a little bit. Why would the media engage in such a practice of deception? Isn't the media supposed to be an unbiased and neutral source of information for the general public? Yes, the media is that on a good day. However, the media is also a business. The main goal of the media, as is any business, is profit. What can garner the most amount of profit? And as Dollar, Fleming, and Musati state, sensational and outlandish, abhorrent news sells. For example, if you state that Nazis have taken over downtown Ottawa, that's going to garner a lot of attention. That's going to raise eyebrows. That's going to spread the word. Far more selling than Ottawa is occupied by peaceful protesters. Doesn't even have the same ring. This sort of adversarial nature to the media is not productive. You see, these people who believe themselves to be disenfranchised, to be on the receiving end of society's blame, they're frustrated with the way things are going. If you patronize them, you are merely adding fuel to the flame. A notion that Justin Trudeau, our Prime Minister, regrettably failed to understand. Take a look at this clip. This is the Prime Minister in the House of Commons referring to the convoy, its organizers, participants, and fellow MPs on the Conservative side as, well, I'll let him speak for himself.
Conservative Party members can stand with people who wave swastikas. They can stand with people who wave the Confederate flag. We will choose to stand with Canadians who deserve to be able to get to their jobs, who be able to get their lives back. These illegal protests need to stop, and they will, Mr. Speaker.
You can see striking similarities between the Prime Minister's words and the aforementioned Vox piece. There is this narrative and tendency to vilify the convoy and to discredit the opposition or those in favor of the convoy or supporters. This statement was directed at a Conservative MP who is a Jewish woman and a descendant of Holocaust survivors. So you can see how the media is becoming the problem when the views are associated with bigotry on this level and scale of an ignorant prime minister and an unruly media going against Canadians. You can see how that portrays a bad image. Now, if I may interject with my opinion here, I would like to state that I believe that the media was incorrect in its approach to this whole ordeal. If I was part of the media, I would have wished to act as a mediator between the government and the convoy, because it was days of this blockade and radio silence. The convoy and its organizers, as well as participants, could not make their voice heard. All they could resort to was honking the horns on their trucks, making a public and physical gesture. Now, before we end this presentation, I want to quickly touch upon the dissolution of the convoy and the dispersal of the protesters. As you well know, there have been arrests made and convoy organizers are in jail. Some of them are out on bail. Now, I want to take a look at this from a law perspective. Is this dispersal of this protest legal? You could argue that the protesters were merely observing their charter rights. Section 2 guarantees that you are free to peacefully assemble. Now, does this meet the legal requirement of peaceful assembly? I am afraid it does not. There have been two cases that have set out the guidelines, if you will, one in 2000 and one in 2009, that prevents misuse of this right. Quoting directly from the Government of Canada website, Section 2C guarantees the right to peaceful assembly. It does not protect riots and gatherings that seriously disturb the peace. It has been stated that the right to freedom of assembly, along with freedom of expression, does not include the right to physically impede or blockade lawful activities." End quote. You can see that the convoy does not meet both of these requirements. Firstly, gatherings that seriously disturb the peace. The constant honking, even through the entire night, kept many citizens of Ottawa awake, and you can imagine the various complaints that would be posed to police in order to do something about such a inconvenience. The second requirement is it must not blockade lawful activities. The convoy has stopped an entire block and a few side streets and would impede traffic. Traffic was non existent, you could not get through there. So, meaning that people that had jobs or needed to get from A to B through that could not. So, was it a lawful dispersal? I believe so, yes.